Now remember, the topic of this program is sentence complements. Everything we've been looking at so far relates to words or groups of words that complete the meaning of the subject and the verb. In the next lesson and the ones to follow, we're going to be talking about different kinds of subject complements. First, direct objects. A direct object is a noun or a pronoun that receives the action of a transitive verb. It answers the question, what or whom, after the transitive verb. By now you're probably fairly familiar with the idea that a transitive verb passes the action along to some object. Well, technically this is known as a direct object, and the reason that that particular term is important will become clear in a few moments when we move on to Lesson 3. A direct object is always a noun or a pronoun, and it receives the action of the transitive verb. So anytime a verb is being used as a transitive verb in a sentence, you can be sure that it's followed somewhere by a noun or a pronoun which receives the action of the verb, and which is known as the direct object. Of course, there may be other words nearby that modify or give more information about the direct object. But the one-word noun or pronoun that receives the action, that's what's known as the direct object. Take a look at this example. Elaine washed her car. What's the verb here? Washed. The subject, Elaine. And what did Elaine wash? She washed her car. Where's the noun or pronoun that tells us exactly what Elaine washed? The noun car tells us what Elaine washed. And so that's the direct object of the verb washed. The word her, which is a possessive pronoun, gives us a little more information about the car. It modifies the noun car by telling us which car, whose car it was. But the word car, that noun, is the direct object. It receives the action of the transitive verb washed. One more example. Derek applauded the band. What's the verb here? Applauded. The subject of the verb? Derek. And who or what did Derek applaud? Well, Derek applauded the band. So band, that noun, is the direct object of the transitive verb applauded. The article, is thrown in to give a little more information, to modify the band, to tell us which band. But the word band, that noun, is the direct object of the verb applauded. One more thing to realize about direct objects: they may be compound. We've already seen in this series that both subjects and verbs may be compound. That is, more than one word may be part of the subject and the verb, and the two or more subjects or verbs would then be joined by a coordinating conjunction, such as and. The same can be done with direct objects. That is, one sentence, one verb, may have more than one direct object, and the two or more direct objects would be joined by a coordinating conjunction such as and. Here's an example. Dawn bought a blouse and a pair of shoes. What's the verb in this sentence? The verb is bought. The subject, Dawn. She's the one who did the buying. Now, is there anything in the sentence that tells us what Dawn bought? Anything that receives the action of the buying? Well, the answer is there are really two things that Dawn bought. She bought a blouse and a pair of shoes. The two main nouns in those phrases would be the direct objects, blouse and pair. The other words that are there give us a little more information. What kind of blouse? A blouse. What kind of pair? A pair, and a pair specifically of shoes. So those other words give us more information about what kind of blouse and what kind of pair. Those two nouns, blouse and pair, are the two words that both go to make up the direct object in this sentence. So this is an example of how a sentence may contain a compound direct object with two or more things, both of which receive the action of the transitive verb, in this case, bought. Turn to your study guide. We have an exercise now that will test your ability to recognize direct objects when they appear in sentences. Try your hand at the exercise, and then come back and we'll look at the questions together. In this exercise, your assignment was to decide whether a direct object appears in the sentence. Not all of the sentences contain direct objects. In order to decide whether there's a direct object or not, you need to begin by finding the verb and then looking to see whether there's a word that receives the action of the verb. Let's begin. The voters in Lincoln County have selected Anderson for the state legislature 4 times in a row. Let's begin by finding the verb in this sentence. The verb is have selected. Remember that some verbs contain more than one word, in which case we refer to it as a verb phrase. In this sentence, have selected is the verb phrase, which gives the action to the sentence. What is the subject of the verb have selected? That is, who or what is doing the selecting? The answer is the voters. The voters are the one who have selected. Now, is there any word that receives the action of the verb have selected? That is there any word that answers the question what or whom after the verb have selected? Well, the answer is the voters have selected Anderson. Anderson receives the action of the verb have selected, and therefore Anderson is the direct object of the verb in this sentence. The next example. General Sullivan led a fascinating tour of the historic Civil War battlefield in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Once again, what's the verb? The verb is led. The subject of the verb is General Sullivan. General Sullivan is the person who led. Now, what did General Sullivan lead? What or whom did he lead? Is there a word that answers that question? That is, a word which receives the action of the verb led? Yes, what he led was a tour, specifically a fascinating tour. But the noun tour is the key word. That's the direct object of the verb led. It tells us what General Sullivan led. The other words there, fascinating, give more information about the tour. They tell us what kind of tour it was. Notice that all the other words that follow the word tour in this sentence again go to give more information about the action. They don't receive the action directly, they just give more information about it. What kind of tour was it? It was a tour of the historic Civil War battlefield. And where was that battlefield? In Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Those 2 groups of words are prepositional phrases, and the prepositional phrases give more information about the action. They don't receive the action of the verb directly. One tip when you're looking for the direct object of a verb is that the direct object will never be found in a prepositional phrase. The prepositional phrase may give more information about the object, but the prepositional phrase will never contain the object of the verb. That's how we know that those words of the historic Civil War battlefield in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, don't contain the direct object. The direct object is the word tour. Next example. Paula exercised in the weight room at the local gymnasium 3 times a week this past summer. What's the verb here? The verb is exercised. What's the subject? Who did the exercising? Paula. Paula exercised, that's the subject and the verb. Now, is there a word that receives the action of the verb exercised? That is there a word that answers the question, Paula exercised what? Or Paula exercised whom? Well, the answer is there is no word that answers that question. We're not told, for example, that Paula exercised her dog, or Paula exercised her rights. Either of those might be the direct object of the verb exercised, but we're not told that at all. Paula exercised, and the action ends with the word exercised. All the other words in the sentence give more information about how and where and when she did the exercising, but they do not receive the action of the exercising. Therefore, there is no direct object for the verb exercised in this sentence. Remember, that means that the verb exercised is an intransitive verb. It doesn't have a direct object which receives the action. Next example. The theories of Isaac Newton revolutionized physics and astronomy. The verb here is revolutionized. What's the subject? The subject is theories. It was the theories that revolutionized. And what did they revolutionize? That is, what receives the action of the verb revolutionized? Well, in this case, there are 2 things that were revolutionized, physics and astronomy. So both of those words are part of the direct object of the verb revolutionize. So we have, in this sentence, a compound direct object. Remember, a direct object can include two or more things, joined usually by a coordinating conjunction, like and. So in this sentence, there are two direct objects joined by the word and, physics and astronomy. Our last example. Benjamin Franklin's first job was working as an apprentice in a printing shop. What's the verb in this sentence? The verb is was. And perhaps you could recognize right away that this is not the kind of verb that has a direct object. Was is a form of the verb to be. And remember, to be is the most common and most important of the linking verbs. To be is naturally a verb of being rather than a verb of action. And remember that only verbs of action can be transitive verbs. Only verbs of action can pass their action along to a direct object. So this particular sentence does not have a direct object. It's the second example in this exercise of a sentence that doesn't have a direct object. The verb was has as its subject job, and what follows tells us what the job was. It was working as an apprentice in a printing shop. So was is being used as a linking verb, and what comes before and after the linking verb, those two things are being equated. We are being told that they are one and the same. This is different from having a direct object which receives the action of the verb. So for this sentence, there is no direct object.